You're listening to Popcorn Pals, and this episode, we're joined by Dave Leigh from Dave Leigh Down Under, where we're discussing Disney Pixar's Elemental. I'm Tim Ifland, movie buff, and this is Popcorn Pals, a popcorn podcast with Leigh and Tim spin-off, where I'll be joined by a rotation of movie-loving legend guest hosts to discuss the latest and greatest new big screen releases. It's the same salty fun with some new flavors. And I feel so lucky to have someone I have admired for quite some time in the land of podcasts and YouTube content creation and movie interviews with big name directors and actors. My pal Dave Leigh, a.k.a. Dave Leigh Down Under, is joining me today. How are you, Dave?
I'm great, Tim. Thank you for having me on.
Of course. Now, I feel like I'm a bit late to the party here because we have had you on the podcast before. Last year when I was on leave on leave from the podcast, I take annual leave. I was on holidays or wherever I was, who knows. You and Leigh talked about Secrets of Dumbledore, the latest Fantastic Beasts. So
That's right, yeah.
you can go and check out that episode, friends. You can listen to that. So thanks for agreeing to talk to me this time.
Of course, it's great to finally. We've had so many interactions on Instagram and whatever, and I listen to your podcast and watch interview videos and stuff like that. So it's obviously yes, I'm happy to be here. So thank you for having me on.
Awesome. And likewise, I mean, outside of sliding into your Instagram DMs to chat the latest things going on in movie land, yeah, catching all your amazing stuff on your YouTube channel and your podcast in the past too. So yeah, it's really good to have you. And let's get on with the show because we're going to talk Elemental, which follows the story of an unlikely pair, Ember and Wade, in a city where fire, water, land, and air residents live together. Elemental City. Ember is a fiery young woman and Wade a go-with-the-flow guy, and they're about to discover something elemental, how much they actually have in common. Now, Elemental is directed by Peter Son of The Good Dinosaur fame. There's a recent Pixar movie that he directed, which I don't think gets enough credit. Are you a fan of The Good Dinosaur?
I have always liked it. I understand why people perhaps don't like it. It's such a quaint, very different kind of film, but yeah, I've always liked it.
It's a nice film. I mean, look, there's not a non-nice Pixar film out there. They're all nice for everyone to enjoy. Now, Elemental has a screenplay and story by John Hobbit, Kat Lickle, and Brenda Scher, from a story by Peter Son, and it stars a voice cast including Leah Lewis, Mamoudou Athie, Ronnie Del Carmen, Sheila Omni, Wendy McClendon Covey, and Catherine O'Hara. Bow down to the Queen, Catherine O'Hara. Now, before we get into discussing the film itself, I wanted to chat about a few things you brought up in your review of Elemental, which is now on your YouTube channel. So after you've listened to this episode, of course, listener, you can head over to Dave Leigh Down Under on YouTube. Now, you went into Elemental with some low expectations. Can you unpack that for me a little bit? Why was that?
It's interesting because I think, and I talked about this in my review at length, is that the marketing on this film has been so weird in that it's been, and I think the last few Disney movies, in fact, have suffered from this, is that for some reason the marketing hasn't been pushed out as far. And from what I've seen, like there's been as much marketing, trailers, the same amount of trailers, posters, etc., but it doesn't feel like the stuff's being pushed out as much. And particularly in the case of this movie, it feels like we were sold a completely different film to what we actually got. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but I'm sure we'll get into that a bit more later when we get into the meat of the film. But yeah, it just felt like they were trying to sell us on this really kind of generic animated movie, and that's kind of how it came across in the marketing. Early receptions to it weren't great. Granted, they came from Cannes Film Festival, which is probably not the best audience for something like this.
It was such a weird decision of the festival to curate Elemental into the mix of things. So I agree. It was just a weird, it's premiering at Cannes.
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah. Like I thought the same with Indiana Jones. It's almost kind of like Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. But were the Khans trying to up the exposure? They're trying to get into the. I don't know what it is, but yeah, I thought it was very strange. And of
Mm,
course, yeah, the reception out of that was not great. But naturally, the audience you get from Khan is not. This is not that in that wheelhouse, I suppose. Yeah. So yeah, I kind of went into it with a bit lower expectations. I guess also the last few Disney animated things haven't been great as well, and I
mm.
just kind of feel a bit soured. But I was pleasantly surprised.
I mean, I totally agree with you about the misleading and arguably lackluster marketing campaign for Elemental, which is a real shame because what we have here is a really lovely movie, a really lovely
Mm,
story, which we'll get into. But I kind of want to digress and share how another recent-ish film really misled me to the point of anger in their
yeah.
marketing, which was Amazon Prime's Cinderella,
Oh yeah.
because it alluded to the fact that it was an original musical, because in all the trailers it had that one song that Camila Cabello was singing and it was an original sound, but what we
Yeah.
ultimately got was a tacky, awful, cringe jukebox musical I wish I never saw.
Yeah.
And I really think that marketers need to, like, not show you everything, not play all their cards in the marketing, but actually give you an insight into
Mm,
what it is. And
yeah.
I went into Elemental having only watched the teaser, which I think came out last year.
Yeah.
There's a really cool sequence of Ember walking onto a train and interacting with all the other people within the city. But so I had no idea that what I was actually walking into was a Pixar rom com and an immigrant story.
Yeah.
And I think they're two huge headlines that are really important to share with an audience because they're important stories to tell.
My gut feeling with this is that perhaps they're worried about the demographic that's going for. And
Okay.
I think Disney have always been really weird about trying to market a movie for all audiences and being scared that if they market it one way,
Mm,
it'll neglect other part of the audience. So for me, it could be that they've gone, we've got a romance story on our hands, but we don't want to neglect like the male audience. And this is something they've suffered with for a long time, is that they have a real trouble in marketing, I think, really anything. And they did, like, when that Winnie the Pooh movie came out in like 2010, they barely marketed that. They did like one trailer and there was
mm,
like two or three posters, and that was because over the years they had watered down that brand so much that it became like the Disney Kinder brand.
right.
You know, Mickey Mouse is like the symbol of the studio, and then you've got like Winnie the Pooh is like the Kinder, you know, preschool Disney sort of icon. And when they did that movie, which is such a gorgeous, like incredible film, they really struggled to market it because they thought Winnie the Pooh was like the Kinder thing, and people wouldn't. So I think we got a similar thing here where they were worried about, you know, neglecting a section of the audience. It's a gorgeous movie, it's a gorgeous story, and it is one that is important and important now. And rom-coms are great. That's one of my favorite genres of all time. Like, my
Yes.
Notting Hill is the movie, is one of the films I revisit once or twice a year.
Yeah.
Love Actually I watch every year. Even like Adam Sandler, like Big Daddy and The Wedding Singer, 51st Dates. I grew up on all this stuff. I adore rom-coms, and I was so surprised when I got in the cinema. I was like, hang on, we're going, this is great, because we've never really seen this in animation before, I don't think. Like
No,
this anyway.
no, I was trying to wrap my brain about that exact question or thought. Like, has the medium of animation lent into these genres before? But let's kick off with story. I want to start here in that when we're first introduced into the film, we're kind of thrust into, on the surface, a truly harmonious city of all the
Mm,
elements working together and coexisting. And there's some really fun stuff in that, until really quickly the cracks in the rampant discrimination within
mm,
elemental cities start to present themselves,
yeah,
namely targeted towards the fire people, which Ember is one of.
yeah,
And this was a surprise for me in a Pixar movie, that I welcomed the dialogue around it, because
mm,
despite the fantastical nature of Elemental City, it felt real and it felt
mm,
human
yeah.
straight away. And this is what Pixar do best. And I think what the medium of animation allows is for difficult conversations to be presented in a really accessible way for kids. And heck, like also in this movie, it's for adults.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's You got it right there. Like Pixar, it's like been the crux of their storytelling since the beginning. It's a story about toys, a story about cars, about monsters, but they are all something. There's just something beneath the surface. And I saw one comment, or I'd say numerous comments on social media about, oh, I remember when Pixar movies weren't all political and stuff. I'm like, hang on a
Mhm.
minute. And I was like, no, the comment that I saw was like, oh, remember when Pixar movies weren't political? Give me the Incredibles and Monsters Inc. I was like, I had to reply. I was like, hang on a minute. You do realize that like Monsters Inc. is about like accepting people or accepting others for who they are, despite
Yes.
the fact they might be a little bit different. And I said, if the Incredibles had been released today, you would call Frozone woke. You know,
Right.
like the ooh, just knock my microphone there. You're a little bit excited, but like he's a very like front and center lead character. Frozone, this African American superhero. If
Yeah.
you did that today, everyone would be going, "Oh, you're pushing an agenda." But people
Yes.
don't have such short memories. But that's like an example. Pixar have done this for so long, and like The Incredibles was the same deal, which was about you know people who are a little bit different or whatever. And Elemental's really tackling head on this sort of immigrant story.
Yeah.
And director Peter Son has put a lot of himself and his story into it.
Yes.
And that's what loving, particularly with this kind of new wave of the Pixar stuff. They're really picking their filmmakers and letting them tell their story. We saw it with
Yes.
Turning Red more recently. I just think it's just such a beautiful way to tell these stories, and it makes it feel real. And I'm my grandparents and my mother, they immigrated from Italy in the 1960s, so
Mm.
I could relate with that because I knew people like, particularly like Ember's parents. My grandparents were, you understand the struggles of coming into a new life, assimilating with a new culture and new
Yeah.
people, and that kind of maybe that more disgruntled nature that there's something really heavy on their shoulders that Ember's parents have carried their whole life, and like that's something
Mm.
that I picked up on from my grandparents as well. So that's definitely something I could relate to, and yeah, dude, it just felt just like a real tangible thing. I think
Yeah.
they did it such a beautiful way.
Thanks for sharing, Dave, because it's so important to voice the fact that like when a movie resonates with you in a really unique and particular way. It's great that this story of an immigrant family finding their feet and dealing with the discrimination because they were different, looking different, and how they interacted with the world differently, and how they were put on the literally outer limits of the city. They were separated from
Yeah,
Elemental City, and that way there's some quite tangible discrimination going on about
yeah,
space. So yeah, it's so nice to hear that you can relate to that in some way too. And just
yeah.
building on the fact that you pulled out earlier was that it is based on the director Peterson's life, and his parents emigrated from Korea into the US, and they lived in the Bronx. And what's really nice in terms of the synergy and coming from a lived experience and an authentic voice, which you mentioned
Mhm.
before,
Yeah,
the stories being told from people who have lived these stories in
yeah.
some way, is that his family opened up a grocery store selling fruits and vegetables, and Ember's family had was it called a fire store? Just these great puns
Yeah,
and
something
plays on
like that.
words.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. So there's
Or the
literally he's
fireplace. That was the
the
fireplace or
fireplace.
something. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. So I think that's really, really important from a story perspective in this world forever and always. And it's great to see that story being given such a big platform like in a Pixar movie. But of course it does, because Pixar just find ways of telling universal stories, but
Mhm.
through really specific lived experiences that just have something for everyone.
Yeah, I think so. And like I said, you had that with Turning Red recently. Domi
Mm,
Shi, very much her kind of story, her culture thrown into that with Soul, Kent Power, and like these movies are just so beautiful, so wonderful. And I think there's like this real beautiful thread that you can send through a majority of the Pixar stuff, and they're all just human stories told through these weird kind of characters. This one's like a water guy and a fire girl,
yeah.
and that's then when I think it's such a disservice to have like advertised the movie about cool fire girl and water dude get up to some
Yeah.
wacky things in this element city, and then it's just this completely different thing. But maybe the other thing is Disney's like, oh, they want to avoid that kind of conversation that, oh, this movie might be too woke for
Mm.
some section of the audience, in inverted commas, for people who I can't see it, you know. But I think like we had that backlash over Lightyear. There was
Yeah.
like that 2-second gay kiss in the film, and it caused such an uproar. And it's like maybe they just were like, let's just avoid any sort of, I don't know. It's weird, but I think it was a very huge disservice to the movie to market it as something that it absolutely not.
Yeah, look, there's so much to unpack with that. There's like a whole podcast series on that alone, I reckon. But
Mm,
there's two things that disappoint me about what you said is it's disappointing that audiences have that reaction to these stories, these authentic stories. That's
mhm.
really upsetting. But it's also
Yeah,
disappointing for me that Disney don't just cut out the noise, the white noise, and just go
yeah,
forward and honor and respect the stories that they're empowering their filmmakers to tell, but they're not being clear and open that it's a story that is being told here. So yeah, Fire Girl, Water Guy, there's cool stuff in that alone. I totally
mhm,
agree. That's awesome. Sold. That's my
yeah.
buy-in. But there's so much more heart to this film that no one knows unless you go
Yeah.
and see it.
I thought the same thing. It's like you're willing to go the extra mile to make these movies,
Mhm.
treat them like how they should be. It's like there's like at some weird thing that then it almost feels like, oh, we're doing it, but oh, oh shit, we're a bit scared. Let's like pull the brakes a little bit, but before it gets out to the audience. And like I don't know, it's so weird. It's such a weird thing. It really is. Like it's a miracle that some of these movies are getting made,
Mm,
but then like treat them with the respect,
exactly.
then that extra mile to I don't know, to treat them as they are, I suppose, instead of make it like look like something else.
Yeah, and just to build on that in terms of honoring and respecting these stories, what I'm really grateful for is that this original Pixar movie is finally hitting the big screen because over the
Mm,
last few years we've been hit with the pandemic and
yeah,
different content distribution strategies that Disney luckily had a platform there and ready to go to serve content
yeah,
to audiences through different experiences not being able to get out in the world and have those shared cinema experiences. We've already referenced Turning Red and Soul, two of some of my favorite animated films of the last 5-10 years, going straight to streaming, which again is also a whole other podcast to unpack that
yeah,
whole world. But it's great to see that an original Pixar story for the first time in 3 years or something is
yeah,
finally getting the big screen treatment. And I'm really grateful for that. It's just a shame that the marketing behind it didn't give it the best shot to make
yeah,
it known what sort of beautiful story it was telling. Can we talk about the rom-com part of the story?
yeah,
Girl meets boy, boy and girl have an awkward encounter, the meet cute of it all, and they don't see eye to eye. Of course, that's
mm,
in the formula of a rom-com. It's a
yeah,
classic setup of literally opposites attract. Here we
mhm.
have fire and water. It should spell disaster, but what we get is great comedy and heart. You said rom-coms are is some of your favorite genre. But how did you sort of respond to the way that they played within the rom-com genre within this medium?
Well, I loved it, obviously. I just think it's like I was like literally sitting there thinking, I'm trying to think when has any studio attempted to do this in animation before, and it struck me weird because it just worked so well. It's like made for it. Like we see these rom coms, which is opposites attract, the goofball and the high society girl, or
Mm.
the big oafish guy and the pretty woman, or whatever the stuff you see in sitcoms and all of that. But you've never really seen it like two weird like monster people,
Right.
like like a fire girl and a water guy. And I just thought like how have they never done this? Like it just works so well. The way they've been able to visualize that analogy or make that formula work is just like how haven't you done this before? And why hasn't it been done like a million times? But I think at
Mm.
that it doesn't make it makes it even more special. And as someone who loves that genre and who loves animation, it was just so cool. It was just really cool to see. I loved my experience with the movie.
Yeah, I mean the formula that they kind of twist works
Mm,
here, and I think, really well within the medium of animation because you can
Yeah.
really stretch the boundaries
Hmm.
of having fun with how the characters interact with each other and all the quirks and idiosyncrasies of them. And what we get here, though, because it ladders up to these really beautiful layers of the immigrant story, is that they fall in love with each other's cultures as well and the customs
Hmm.
that they didn't know before because it's the classic Romeo and Juliet piece.
Yeah.
Elements don't mix. Literally, it's something that a character says in the movie,
Hmm.
but there's so much to discover about yourself through discovering other people's lived experiences. And there's a real tender and fun way that they go about that in this film.
Yeah, I thought so too. And like you mentioned Romeo and Juliet, that's like one of my sort of first thoughts was like,
Mm,
but I mean, if you take any romantic story or romantic comedy, or whatever, you draw a line back to Romeo and Juliet. And of course, Romeo and Juliet was an original story either that was based on fables that came out of Italy and France and, greater Europe. Sort of even before Shakespeare's time. So it's just such a real kind of traditional story, and to do the Romeo and Juliet thing where it pulls in culture and ties that into the story, and whether that be the setting of Verona of Italy, or and that melding with the Shakespearean English weird language, and just those two characters from two very different backgrounds falling in love with each other when they shouldn't, and that extra layer of the family not agreeing with that.
yes.
And then you go back to something like Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, the classic Sidney Poitier film, Catherine Hepburn and Spencer Tracy, and it's very similar as well there, where it tackles it with that sort of real dramatic edge, but there's a lot of humor in it too. So I think it is, yeah, it's something that has been done before, and it throws back to a lot of these great sort of ideas. But yeah, then to do it in animations just
Mm.
is so cool. It's really
I
awesome
want
to
to
see.
unpack a few things that I guess you could call them criticisms or notes of the film from my perspective. I'm keen to hear your take. While we're still on the point of rom coms, I don't know whether it was an ingredient of the rom com genre that I felt was missing, but they didn't have like any friends. There wasn't a best
Oh
friend
yeah,
for Wade, and there wasn't a best friend for
yeah.
Ember, and maybe that's okay because it was such a targeted, intimate story about the immigrant family,
Hmm.
and then Ember herself, and then Wade, and we got a flavor of what his family were like as well. But I felt like there might have been a missing ingredient of like a best friend or an insight into who they were from a different perspective that could have, helped with the rom com element of the story. You looked surprised when I said that.
Mm.
Like, is it something that you didn't bother about, or you're like, oh yeah, where was the best friend in the piece?
Oh, well, yeah, only because it's not
Mm,
something I really thought about. I didn't even think about it. But now you mention, I'm like, hang on a minute, you're right. I just think it's such a story about like the outsider. The two
mm,
characters are both outsiders, and I think maybe that's the way that they come to connect with each other, and they fall for each other, is that they both see themselves in this other character, even though they
yes.
are so different. They've got like this, I guess, the common ground. But you're right. I just that's, yeah, not something I really even thought about.
Well, there you go. A thought bubble from me to you, Dave.
Thank you very much. Something to dwell
Yeah,
on.
something to dwell on. I also felt like I wanted to dive deeper into the culture of the Fire People because they teased in it, and it was really interesting elements of, for lack of a better word, of the movie. It was sure it was a focused story, like you mentioned, about two characters and their own romantic journey, which is fine. But there was so much more story to tell here. And whether I'm just greedy because I wanted to know more about all these other elements within the city, I felt like there was some really interesting layers that they could have delved into. And who knows, maybe there'll be like an offshoot spin-off TV series like they tend to do that will
Yeah.
show up on Disney Plus where we'll explore Elemental City more. But I think I yearned for more understanding about those beautiful layers of the story. I think they only scratch the surface in that space.
Yeah, I agree with that. I thought the same thing, because there's just like, especially that first trailer
Hmm.
where she's walking through the train and you get all the different people, and like my first thought was like, wow, just like imagine the possibilities of the storytelling
Yeah.
here, and the kind of gags they can get out of it,
Mm.
and just real my cartoon brain
Yeah.
just goes to like the possibilities you can have with these characters and this world. And yeah, just didn't really dive into it. But I think you were on the money. I think they probably had the thought that if this does really well,
Mm.
we've got a limited series in there. It's like that Zootopia
Yep.
Plus thing that they did,
Mm.
where it was like what 5 or 6 minute shorts, so focused on different characters. I think it could be very similar to that. But yeah, I want to see more. I want to see the dirt people and the
Yes.
the cloud people, and see what their life is like. I think even like the world of the fire people and the water people, we didn't really dive that deep into either. I think they could have gone a little bit further. We could have got a little bit more, but then how much do you shove in before it starts impacting the intimate story you're
Mm.
trying to tell? But yeah, I think there's so much possibility in it.
So much possibility, and maybe slightly cynical that we just put our, oh, they're thinking of a franchise. They're putting their franchise hat on.
Yeah,
How,
well,
how can we make this bad boy just work as hard for us as possible from a content perspective? But hey, that's just the world
yeah,
we live in.
that's how it works now.
Just talking about how, there was something that distracted me from the story that it was trying to tell. And it was around the pace. You know how there were a lot of flashbacks that kind of
Yeah,
established some context around who the five people were and some of their customs. And I felt like it could have been more effective as a storytelling tool if it was a little more linear, because every time they chose to flash back to the past, it seemed to just happen like it wasn't a
mm,
natural sort of transition within the story. Do you know what
yeah.
did you feel the same
Yeah,
thing?
no, I've had the same.
Yeah.
It just felt very disjointed.
Mm.
Like, had they just like given us like vomit of like exposition at the beginning or something, just like to set it up, maybe that could have worked. Or because it didn't even feel like, usually when you do that, you throw back to you reveal an extra layer,
Yeah.
you get like a little bit. It was like almost like they didn't really add a whole lot. I mean, other than giving you backstory, but
Mm.
yeah, it felt very disjointed and not like it was like leading up to anything in
So
particular.
true.
Maybe just like explosion of exposition at the beginning, some flashback. I don't know. Might have been okay, but yeah, I do think that was a bit odd.
Yeah, it just took me out of the piece. I valued what they were showing us, but I thought, oh, I
Mm,
wish they had, yes, that explosion of exposition at the beginning. I understand maybe that was a choice they made because you do get a lot of visual exposition already when you're first entering Elementals.
yeah.
It is a lot to take in
Mm,
there visually that speaks to character without saying. It's show don't tell, so they do that really well. Pixar nail that every time. I think that maybe they could have done what Up did so beautifully. That opening is
mm.
something that I think about
Oh yeah,
often.
yeah,
That really,
yeah.
really powerful emotional piece about a man and his wife and their life together, and then his life
Mhm.
once she passes. And like seriously, I've got chills just thinking about that damn opening. Like what an impact. And so I think that maybe this film could have really lent into that strategy,
Mm,
from a story
yeah.
perspective, and maybe packed a more emotional punch and just kept the pace of things a little tighter throughout the life of the
Yeah,
movie.
no, I agree. I think like that opening of Up is one of the greatest openings of not just any animated
Yeah.
film, but any film ever. It is just so you don't even need to know a lot. It's just a montage of their
Yeah.
life, and it doesn't even need to go too deep. There's no dialogue. It's just gorgeous music.
Yes. The
Michael Giacchino's incredible score. It's
stunning.
just that's all you need for that backstory, and that just gives the movie its heart. That scene, you talk to anyone about Up, the first thing you think about is that opening scene.
Mm.
It is heartbreaking, it's heartwarming, it's beautiful, and it's just that's all you needed. Maybe that's what this film needed, just something, just giving it that
A
backbone.
little tweak. We recommend a
Mm.
director's cut to Disney Pixar
Yeah.
with that. Just restructure it just slightly for us
Yeah.
pair. Is there anything else about the story that you'd like to chat about, or do you want to launch into the characters and the voice performances?
Let's get in the characters and voice performances.
Now we have Ember, who is the main character in this, obviously equally with
Mhm.
Wade, and they're
Yeah.
voiced by Leah Lewis. She's at a crossroads in her life because her father is getting old, and she's being trained to one day alluded to, one day teased to take over the shop, the
Mhm.
family business, and the
Yeah.
shop is their livelihood. It's their identity as an immigrant family, which is made really really clear in the story. But who we have in Amber is a woman who's trying to figure out who she is, and what she wants. Yeah, how did you like her character?
I loved it. I loved like both of them.
Mm.
I thought the voice performances were amazing, and I even tweeted the other day. I was like, I think this is like some of the best vocal performances we've had in a Pixar movie,
Mm.
in an animated film recently. I just think they just felt so real, and the actors that were chosen here just brought something just so yeah real,
Mm.
for lack of a better word, to it. And I think that the character was just beautifully fleshed out, and
Yeah.
that idea, like the immigrant story of maybe perhaps someone who has an older generation parents who want her to continue in that family tradition, and but then there's that very modern spin of, and if you think about it, it's also very Disney princess as well,
Yeah.
in the fact that the parents want them to whatever leave the kingdom, or
Mm.
whatever, and not run away with the mole rat or whatever. It's sort of
Street rat.
like street rats. That's the word. I thought, no, that's not quite right. Street rat. More rat. Kevin Smith.
Yeah, that's a totally different vibe.
Yeah. No, I think it's like that sort of thing, as well as like defying the
Mhm.
parents, but she also just has like such a deep respect for the parents as
Yes.
well. And she's not, perhaps when you think about the Disney princesses, they can be very rebellious.
Mm.
She doesn't really have that rebellious streak. She just wants to be her own person, not going into spoiler territory, but doesn't want to upset the
Yeah.
parents at the same time. And that's that like inner conflict. I thought it was just worked out so beautifully. It's just such a really great sort of arc through it, and they fleshed her out really nice.
Yeah, beautifully put. I want to add one thing to the conversation about an element of her character. Gee, I'm unintentionally being punny with my language in this movie. Please forgive me. Ember loses her temper a lot. And
Mhm.
I think it brings forward a conversation about anger management, but more than that, social anxiety, stress, and then
Yeah.
how you manage those feelings and emotions in real life situations. That as well as the immigrant story and the rom-com and that sort of thing. It's another conversation to be opened up around the dinner table with families around that,
Mhm.
because I was really surprised, not surprised, I don't know what word should I use, but it was refreshing to see a character who didn't have it all together and manifested her emotions in a way that we can all relate to, that you don't necessarily
Yeah.
might reveal about yourself that you lose your temper and you get angry. We all do it. We're human. So
Mhm.
I loved that it was being showcased in an animation, in a kids film, and we can all relate, right? Did you ever work in
Yeah.
customer service, and just how freaking irate you would be at those shitty customers that would come in and, oh, maybe I'm going to triggering territory because I'm going back to my time behind the
I
counter.
I did very brief stint when I was in
Mm.
England a few years ago. I did a very brief stint at HMV
Oh,
store.
okay.
So it's like it's essentially their JB
Hmm.
Hi-Fi media thing, and it was in Cambridge. So obviously some very posh
Mm.
people would come into the store,
Fancy.
and dealing with them is very is another story. But yeah, yeah, a lot of just weird, strange, wonderful people would come in, and the people are like,
Oh,
it's just
yes.
like one guy got annoyed with me because they didn't have a DVD. And I was like, he was looking for one of the Peter Kay's stand-up DVD. I was like, I think all I've got is this. It's just like this, whatever, like variety show he
Yeah.
did. I don't want that. I have that one.
And
And I'm just like, well, I can't,
it's your fault,
it's just a
Dave.
stupid thing like
It was
that.
your
Yeah,
fault.
yeah, I know. And it's like that scene where with that kid there pinching the little sparklers,
Yes.
and it's that same sort of like, really, like, why are you annoying me? Yeah, oh yeah, definitely have had those experiences for sure.
It's buy one, get one free. Well, I'll have the free one. It doesn't
Yeah,
work like
yeah,
that. Oh my gosh. Those sorts
yeah,
of where you just can't reason with idiots.
yeah,
Indeed. Let's talk about Wade Ripple, which I love the name. I love the sort of inventiveness, simple inventiveness of working
yeah,
what element they are into the character name, which is always a fun shtick of animation where their names are really cool. So Mamoudou Athie,
yeah,
now he is a city inspector, and arguably alongside maybe a ticket inspector, the most hated public servant profession in all the land. His job is
yeah,
to pick faults in things, but it's juxtaposed with his beautiful sensitive nature, and he's so open to learn new things about the people that he interacts with. And it really hurt to see him have to do a job that clearly wasn't suited to him. But
Yeah.
then we just go on a journey of discovering who Wade is, and Ember sees that. Like, we kind of see that through Ember's eyes. Yeah, it's just a really lovely, he's just a really lovely character, isn't he?
Yeah, I thought, but one of my favorite things about it was that first scene that he's in, like you mentioned, and he's has to write her those tickets, and he's just so nervous, and he's got like water dripping down. This is a guy made from water
Sweating.
who's just
Yeah.
like sweating,
Yeah.
and I thought that is just brilliant.
Uh,
Like I said, like the cartoony possibilities with these characters. I think that's one of my favorite beautiful little gags in the movie is that he's just constantly, and throughout the movie he's just constantly like
yeah.
sweating, and it just adds this real, again, humanity to the character.
Yes.
I thought it was good. I thought they were both great. I thought both the characters just so cool, and the way not only they did it narratively, but they were able to do it
Mm,
visually. And like we mentioned with Ember and her bursts of anger, and she turns
mhm.
purple. It's like purple fire, like really,
That's
like,
bad. That's hot.
yeah, real hot fire. I just thought just the way they were able to do it
Mm,
visually is great. But yeah, Wade is just such a, yeah, such a great character, and I thought the same. It's like just hard to watch him. Like, I don't want to do this, but I have to do it. I have to get back to the job and like clock out for the day, or get the sack or whatever. But no, that's beautiful. Just both really beautiful characters.
one of the things that I really appreciated about Wade Ripple was that he wasn't afraid to show his emotions, and neither
Hmm.
was Ember, although she didn't particularly have control, or they overcome, and she needed to learn how to manage them. But Wade's emotions were embraced and encouraged by his family. The crying of happiness was something that was just so open and apparent. How did you find that? Like, did you always find it endearing, or were you slightly irated or by that from time to time? Because I felt like maybe they lent into that just a little too much, and I thought, does he have to cry like all the time?
Yeah, I thought it was like the crying game
Yeah,
that they
yeah,
play, as just like it was very
yeah.
funny. But yeah, it's almost like a gag that they just keeps repeating
Bit
it.
too
That
much.
it's like a bit too much. But I do, yeah, I love the idea of the character, especially a male character
Hmm.
who can show a softer side and be more open, and we particularly haven't really seen that in the Disney cartoon. We're used to seeing the princes, and the prince is the one that's supposed to step in and save the day and save the princess. And in some respect, it's almost like a twist on
It
that, where
is.
Amber is the one who comes in and saves him, or they
They
save
save
each
each
other,
other.
but she comes in and helps him get out of whatever. But it didn't bother me too much. I don't think. I just think that gag of them crying a lot yeah, it did get repeated a bit too much. But I love that idea of, then we don't see characters like
Mm,
this that often, and I thought it was really nice. But I did like the juxtaposition of one set of parents not really wanting, you know, the fire girl to be with the water.
mm.
You can't be with the water guy, but then his family being just so open and embracing
Yes.
about it, and that felt real as well, because I feel like in a lot of these situations, in more real life, where it might be a mixed relationship or
Yeah.
something, in some cases you probably will have one family that is a bit more against that idea, well, another family will be very open arms about it.
Mm.
And I think that's maybe a spin we again haven't really seen that often before, and I felt that was quite refreshing as well. I loved just when she first goes into his family. I was expecting them to be like the Romeo and Juliet thing, which is like both families are just so like absolutely cannot be together.
Yes.
It was just so refreshing to be like, oh wait, they're embracing
Mm.
this, and I loved to see that as well, because it does show just different facets of life.
Yeah, I mean, we're also experiencing that unexpectedly as an audience member through the experience of Ember, because she's ostracized in the community, and yet she feels like kind of taken aback by the fact that Wade's family have really welcomed her in, and they're curious about her.
Yeah,
And there's no ifs, buts, queries, questions, concerns. She can sit at the dinner table, and that's that. But
yeah,
it's important to weigh that against her experience compared to Wade's, and just how it is all beautifully woven together. And just speaking of that, I'd like to talk about Ronnie Del Carmen's work as Bernie, Ember's dad, because I found him to be such a sweet man,
Mhm.
and he was focused on the happiness of his family and that work
Yeah.
hard mentality of a small business owner paired with the immigrant experience. And just like Ember and Wade's relationship developing, I really loved seeing Ember and her dad's relationship on screen too. And then it was just a really, really beautiful one that was laid in respect, some conflict as well, but I think that plays out
Mhm.
nicely and as expected. Yeah, what would you have to say about the character of Bernie?
I loved him.
Mhm.
It's like the first moment I saw him on the screen, I knew exactly who this guy
Yeah.
was, and that's my grandfather.
Ah,
A
beautiful.
very just very hard edged
Mm,
man. He passed away when I was
mhm.
12. He was in his 80s when he passed away, and that's a long time ago, 20 odd years ago, yeah. But he had been through the war,
Goodness.
World War
Yeah.
II, an Italian
Mm,
soldier, was captured as a prisoner of war by the English army, and ended up at the end of the war staying in England and working on the farm. And he was like accepted, like they're like, we need farm hands. I saw his story in Ember's father, in that it was that guy that just did what he had to do to keep his family together. And in my grandfather's case, that was move the family from Europe to
mm,
Australia in the 60s, and, move to a new place where they didn't know anyone and didn't know the language. And my grandmother was illiterate, so she couldn't read or write. And she was very hard edged as well. And I just saw that in these characters, but the love that's inside the characters, that they just have nothing but love for their family,
yes.
and just want to do everything for their family, make sure that their family don't have to go through what they went through. And I feel like Ember's father is from that same generation,
Yes.
and he's probably been through a lot. He, may have been through a war in this fantastical world or whatever it is, and he just understands what it is to have that hard life
Mm.
and want to have the best life he can for his family, for his wife, for his children, whatever. And I just knew instantly when I saw him on the screen, and that's just how real it was. Like within seconds, I was like, "This is an immigrant story. Like this is like that." So yeah, I related with that a lot, and I love that character.
Mm,
Yeah, I saw a lot of my not just my grandfather, but my grandparents
mm.
in him. That hard edge, but with that real soft center that is just like, it's a very strict wanting you to just it, but it's not from any like place of malice or anything.
Mm.
It's just like because they want the best from you, and they want you to achieve the best and be the best you can. And I just loved it. It's such a beautiful character. Both of the parents, really beautiful characters.
No, I love hearing your resonance with this story and those characters.
Mm,
Thanks for sharing. And I mean, it just goes to show again that we mentioned at the top of the episode was that these stories coming from an authentic place, and you can clearly tell that it comes through the lens of Peter Son's lived experience as an immigrant, and arguably his father running their fruit and vegetable shop in Brooklyn or the
hmm.
Bronx rather. So
Yeah,
yeah, it was a really great relationship to see play out on screen, and one that has certainly stuck with me in terms of how the immigrant experience of the five people of Ember's family, how that ladders into their beautiful customs. We both agree we wanted to see more of, but it just added a
yeah,
layer of nuance and just added a bit of profoundness to their experience as
yeah.
well. Are there any other characters that you want to call out that you particularly enjoyed in this movie before we move on to the next part?
I loved it. It's not a character that was even in it that long. Was it Wade's boss when they go to the and he's just like sitting there in the office surrounded by like dirt, and he's just the grumpiest
Yeah.
guy. I thought he was just a really funny, cool, like cartoony character. And like we said, that's like more like that's the stuff I wanted more of in this
Yeah.
movie. Just makes that this world seem more lived in or more
Mm.
expansive. I just that even that interaction between the three characters and this like gruff like dirt guy, it's just I thought it was really cool. Or again that kid that just wanted to steal. As annoying as he is, I thought it was just brilliant. It was such a good little
My
gag.
queen. As he would
Yeah.
pass the flower. Yeah, no, Wade's Wade's boss is I got like Mike Wazowski, you forgot to file your
Yeah.
papers last night. Just that classic sort of thing
Yeah.
that Disney get so well, those really quirky
Yeah.
characters that are sometimes like you take away and be like, gee, I love that character. I'd love to revisit that. And
Yeah.
they become quite infamous in that
Mhm.
sense. Now, I want to talk about the look of the film for a little bit. Pixar are so inventive with the everyday and turning it into something magical or clever in the context of the world in which their characters inhabit. I think their world building is world class. Like it's second to none. And this movie is as much a visual feast as any Pixar movie. What were some of the things that really struck out in terms of the style and the look of the movie that you really, really loved?
I love that it was like a little different to something that Pixar really
Mm,
does. And I think Pixar maybe at one point had like a house style, like you'd look at a movie and know it's a Pixar
hmm.
film. But I feel like in more recent years they're kind of pushing away from that
Yeah, interesting
and
observation.
doing something that's maybe a little bit
Yeah.
different. And just it looks a little bit different. The characters look a little bit different. I just love the idea that the way they worked with like a color palette and
Yes.
each character from whatever different, I guess race, dirt people, fire people, whatever. There's just a very different color palette used for each of the characters. But then the way that kind of all melds in together when we get those beautiful vistas of the Element City,
Mm.
it just works so well. And they just use color in the movie, so
Yeah,
beautifully.
it's very vibrant. I mean, you have some primary colors of like red and blue in the titular characters, and that's striking, but it's complemented by this really distinct architectural world. You've got big, tall buildings covered by lush greenery and
Yeah.
water slides, people getting around. I mean, that's fun. Sign me up for that. Wind powered homes, and every detail is like blink and you miss it. But I think that's
Yeah.
also it's got a rewatch value to it, and they're really fun to kind of
Mhm.
discover. There are some that are a bit more overt, and they're fun. You think, oh, that's a
Mm.
bit lame, but no, when it plays out in it and in the context of the story and like character motivations, I loved the Mexican wave at the game. Like I thought that
Yeah.
was
Yeah. Oh, that was
brilliant.
great. That was
It was
wonderful.
so
Yeah.
wonderful.
Yeah.
And it was also a really significant shift in the story about Wade and Ember kind of understanding each other a little more
Hmm.
based on a character choice. But it's told in such with such fun flair. And I just love
Yeah.
that about the medium. Speaking of water, I don't did you feel stressed? I felt stressed by all the water that the fire
Mhm.
people were just surrounded by and interacting with, because I'm
Yeah.
like, they could be
Yeah.
extinguished in an instant. And I was distressed for them. I was like, holding my breath, covering my eyes. That might be a bit traumatic, but I thought, surely Pixar aren't gonna like kill her off. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah. No, I thought the same thing as like these five people just like living right on the edge of like water.
Mm,
Again, it's like the idea of just like them depicting how these different people have come together and assimilated their
yes,
cultures
yes.
together. And like any city around Australia, have it like Chinatown,
Mm,
and it's this town that's just so beautifully inspired by the culture of China and all the Chinese food
yeah.
places. And then you might go walk down the street, and there's like European architecture. Especially in Melbourne, there's so much of this like old European
Mm,
architecture here. That we have like different cultural
yes.
festivals. Like there was a Southeast Asian festival only a couple of weeks ago here, just a celebration of all these different cultures and how they meld together, and then it creates this whole new identity for a
Mm,
city, a place to live. It's just like everyone has just like come together, and like you think on the surface, fire people living with water,
yeah.
and it just doesn't mix, but that they found this way to make
Yeah.
it mix and make this world what it is. I think they did that really well too. And again, like you said, you might have like a big building that has like plants growing all over it or something. It's just that way that the cultures have all come together to create like a unity. I thought
Yeah.
it's great.
Completely agree. Dave, is there anything else on the tip of your tongue you'd like to share about this movie or experience with it, or should we wrap up our take and rate it out of 5 popcorn kernels?
I think the only thing I can add is like go and see
Yeah.
the film. It's like I loved it way more than I thought
Mm,
I would. It's not a perfect movie. It's not the best Pixar movie ever. I wouldn't say it's probably not going to go down as like a classic, all-time
Sure.
classic, but it's a really beautiful
Mm,
film. And there's a lot in there that a lot of people are going to connect with. And whatever angle you come at, two different people coming from different whatevers coming together and cultures coming together, whatever angle you come at this from, I think you're going to find a piece yourself in it. And just ignore the marketing because you're being given. And at the very beginning, I said we've been sold a completely different movie we got in the
mm,
end. Sometimes that can be a bad
mm.
thing because the studio markets something, makes it look like something it's not to make you go see because I know it's going to be bad. But in this case, it's like it's complete opposite. It is such a wonderful, wonderful film. So go and see it. That's all I can say. And support original films in the
Yes.
theater, especially animation, because I feel like all these, particularly with what Disney Plus
Mm,
was doing during the pandemic, great, they were able to get the films out there, but I feel like it has detrimented the audience's experience with animation. That's a whole nother podcast right
yeah.
there. But I feel like people are like, hey, I'll just wait 3 months and it'll be on Disney
Mm,
Plus for free. I don't need to pay for this. And particularly animation that is happening with right now. And Disney didn't do anything to help that through the pandemic, really. But I mean, it's such a weird time. Like, everyone was just making it up as they went along. Just go and see the movie and support it. That's all I can say, really. Yeah,
messages loud and clear from Dave Leigh there. But yeah, I feel like we've created quite a lot of our own podcast spin-offs in this episode.
yeah, we have.
Lots to
It's at
unpack.
least 3 or
I
4
might just
there.
do one spin-off at a time. Dave, what would you rate
Yeah.
Elemental out of 5 popcorn kernels?
Okay. Well, I feel like because it's a great film, really loved it, but it's not like top. Like when I think of
Mm,
Pixar, I don't think it's like absolute classic
mm,
level Pixar, like Toy
yes.
Story or Up or like just one of those Monsters Inc., Ratatouille. It's not like on that echelon. I don't think it's going to be like
Mm.
a classic. I will be giving it a 3 popcorn kernels and a few crumbs, so three
And a
and a
few
half
crumbs.
popcorn
Yeah,
kernels. Yeah,
Remy from Ratatouille has kind of been nibbling on
yeah,
that half.
pushing
Yeah.
a 4, pushing a 4, but I think 3.5. There's a few just other sort of like I feel like that, as we
Mm,
said, they could have done a lot more with it, whether that's the gag
mm,
work or whether it's just the
mm.
narratively could have been better. Yeah, so I'll stick with my 3
Three
and
and
some
some
crumbs.
crumbs. Yeah, you're changing the
Yeah,
changing the formula of my podcast, Dave. Just got
there
and
you
some
go.
crumbs.
Got to mix it up.
So for me, Elemental is a lovely, visually captivating film. A welcome shift in having an original Pixar movie in theaters after so many years on the big screen where they belong. It's a shame that the film's strengths in its tender tale of an immigrant family's journey and a woman finding her place in the world isn't heroed at all in its marketing because it's an important story to tell. And there is a big heart here, full of life and kindness and exploration of self. And it's funny, but I agree with you, Dave. It lacks that Pixar secret sauce, that little ingredient to elevate it above the rest. But heck, it's a very high benchmark that Pixar have across their filmography. So don't let that deter you at all. I'm going to rate Elemental 3.5 popcorn kernels. So I'm kind of bringing my crumbs together and creating a whole half. Is that a thing?
Yeah.
So Elemental is in Australian cinemas from June 15, and that's another episode of Popcorn Pals. I was joined by Dave Leigh of Dave Leigh Down Under fame. Dave, can you please tell the listener where people can find you?
Of course, you can head over to Dave Leigh Down Under. YouTube is my main platform where I will deliver the latest in animation news and pop culture news and all that kind of stuff. I do a regular series called Cartoon Evolution where I chart the history of cartoon characters.
Amazing
Now, some
stuff.
of them as many, thank you, I appreciate that. Some of them as many as like 100 years old. So I just really love telling their story and where they came from and how they've adapted over time. I think it's so
Yes.
fascinating. If any of that sounds interesting, head on over there, Dave Leigh Down. You can find me on Twitter, Instagram as well. I'm very active across those platforms as well. So yeah, hope to see you there.
Dave, thank you so much for joining me. I've absolutely loved talking Elemental. You've made my day. And
It's been wonderful.
as always, thanks so much for listening, and I'll catch you next time. We are now on YouTube, where you will find our latest celebrity video interviews. Simply search Popcorn Podcast with Leigh and Tim and make sure you subscribe so you don't miss a thing.